Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring tech legend Jake Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.
So at the summit, we're going to have the live stream and everything that's going out actually going onto the big screen in the bar.
Oh, cool.
So, and we're trying to have people get to their seat before we restart. And we're going to be playing musical chairs with music, and when the music is stopped, then everybody has to basically be seated. And if you're not, you basically have to stay out, because we don't. At that point, you can't play music on live stream stuff through YouTube, because the music would be caught as a violation. So the live stream will cut away to funky bad shit that you put in, in its place, and you will be back soon. And then when everybody is seated and everything kicks back in, at that point, the music stops. But anybody that's not seated basically can hang out in the bar and watch it.
That'll keep everybody on schedule.
Well, we're gonna try. They got a playlist apparently, and they know the precise timing. You've got a set break time, like 15 minutes or something. So you've got 4-minute song to get everybody up and out, something a little peppy, and then some song that everybody knows is a short 2-3 minute song. So you got to get to your seat, and the bell in the bar may be rung at the point in time that you have to sit down.
Right.
And anyway, everything is going to be on tablet or computer or phone. So no printed program. It saves us a couple $1,000 that we can give for student scholarships instead of printing stuff. And it's all the PowerPoints, everything will be available on the online link.
That's smart. That's really smart. Then maybe there's an online person there, because I believe they can. People can donate money through the chats on YouTube if there's
geez,
Q&A
they can.
session.
Rain it down on us.
Each year, getting better.
Well, I really look forward to the group getting together. It looks like pretty much everybody has bought a box lunch so that they can hang out during the lunch break. I think it'll kind of bond the group as one
right
kind of big en masse. And having the bar there for happy hour is not a bad thing at all,
I agree with that.
Yeah.
That's my session.
Well, people come fresh out with content to discuss and ideas to bounce off each other, and and where do you get to talk to people like that? Right. I mean, who can you talk to about EEG in depth? I mean, my profession isn't, you go to the ball game and somebody says, "What do you do?" I specialize in the computer analysis of the brain's electrical activity. huh? So I can't discuss it with anybody. And when Dirk and I get together, we talk deeply about brain function and kind of foundational mechanisms, and that uh, important discussions. So and those you don't get to talk like that with somebody who actually knows
Right,
what they're talking about very often.
right. No, I worth every single penny, every single second that you spend there, and we got to keep the clocks moving, keep them on schedule, keep them on
Yeah.
schedule.
Yep. Um, and Antonio Martins Murrow coming over from England's got some very interesting infraslow data, um, and looking at activity down at zero point zero 0.06 hertz, and uh, uh, interesting pre-post data at that frequency. So it's uh, he's been doing some interesting work using components for feedback, and that's, I think, something that's going to be kind of one of the next steps for some
Yeah,
people. Similar to somebody considering doing Z-score feedback, the component feedback basically taps you into the actual component that's deviant, and you train it. So, and let's say you have a left frontal slow focus that needs to be trained. Well, that component is not sensitive to eye movement, so you've got a de-artifacted signal by using the component. And anyway, it's I think an idea whose time has actually come a long time ago. There's Julie Anton has published in the area, training deep brain modulators. But we'll see. And then Makoto's got some really interesting stuff that looks at the cortex at various layers in the cortex and the kinds of cells that are there, and the activity that's happening in it, in the basket cells that end up having gamma in them and stuff. So it's it should be an interesting meeting
oh, no
scientifically.
doubt, no doubt.
So,
Jay, something in the back of my mind, literally, the cerebellum. We don't ever talk about it that much. I know it's hard to get to, and I
well,
remember some software was able to get the signal all the way, like, recently. Got any new news on that, or why should most people care?
it it remains for those softwares to prove their outcomes, and that remains. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got software that basically what they believe is that there's a way to see through the brain like it's transparent,
Uh-huh.
electromagnetically transparent, so that ventricles and white matter and gray matter are all the same density, sort of, and
Yeah.
so you can focus at a distant location and see the activity there. But when the generators are local generators that end up having a closed loop, that don't have a directional vector that they generate, seeing them from outside is theoretically not possible. Historically, the cerebellum recordings can be done with an electrode inside, but an electrode on the surface doesn't get a pyramidal cell signal. So, but there were people in the neurofeedback world that kind of went, sub-Inion at the back of the head, and thought that they were feeding it back. And Um, you know, but you're going to pick up some
Yeah.
signal off the back of the brain back there, but I don't know that it's cerebellum.
If they
So,
could if they could figure that out, Jay, like what would be the next step for
well,
neurofeedback?
it's not like we don't actually, the cerebellum by itself wouldn't really be of any interest at all. It's how it works with the brain that's really important. And so, where does it hook in? Well, the basal ganglia, so the frontal to basal ganglia to motor strip function is smooth, and but it also works up front, not just for motor movement and everything, but also for affect and attentional. So it was undervalued a long time as just purely some kind of a shock absorber for your motor system, so you weren't jerky and tremulous, and you didn't overshoot with your grip, and and it does all that, but it does a lot for other systems. But we see that frontally and frontocentrally. We tap into the network. You don't have to stick an electrode into a spot if you're into the network that's got that in it, and that's ultimately uh, the necessity of defining it as a spot and thinking you're seeing something from it. It still is to be proven. I mean, they're selling the software, but
Yeah.
the the there was an interesting panel discussion, and Cynthia Kirsten had a meeting, and Dirk, myself, Joel Lubar, and Bob Thatcher were all on this panel discussion, all online. And Cynthia, she throws a hand grenade into the middle of the room to get the discussion started. Jay, what do you think about SW Loretta? you know, well, that's quite a question, So, um, I I said, well, let me start by saying what makes the EEG. Pyramidal cell, postsynaptic, presynaptic, postsynaptic potentials added, not the actual action potential, uh, and it's the summation of those. And they're oriented radially, so you pick them up on the surface, and um, there are deeper structures in the brain that are monopoles that you don't see on the surface, and those are historically considered silent from the surface. But if you have an electrode in them, you can see what's going on. And we add to that's basically EEG features, but we add to that event-related potentials, which your brain can have a reaction to something, and that's an ERP added into the EEG signal. And then there's slow cortical potentials, the slow baseline drift of networks being hooked up and unhooked. And that neural network dynamics is quite often filtered out, but it's still part of the EEG. So if you add all those together, you've got the EEG. Thinking that you can see something that traditionally has not been seen, and everybody agreed you had to stick something in there to get it, that's an extraordinary claim. And I'd be really tickled pink if it's true, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So, I'm still waiting for the extraordinary evidence. I have yet to see it. Dirk's next. And they say, what do you think? He says, well, I agree with Jay. I haven't seen the evidence, and I'd be happy if it were true, but I haven't seen the evidence. And historically, these structures are. Uh, Imagine you're in a football stadium, and you're on one side of the stadium, and everybody on the stadium is roaring, and the PA system is going, and there's a car in the parking lot on the far side with the doors closed, and somebody's having a quiet conversation. What's the likelihood of hearing that?
Hmm.
That we've got all this noise between us and these very silent features, and to say you can hear them is an extraordinary claim. So he suggests that since he puts stimulators into brains all the time. I mean, he's a neurosurgeon. He does that. And if you've got Parkinson's disease and you've got an advanced tremor, they'll stick a wire in with a little chip on it. And those chips are much more advanced now than they were. Burst mode firing on chips was invented by Dirk. Nobody did that shit before him. So he totally out of the box. And what frequency did they operate? He wanted 600 hertz in these chips, so he could record spike trains and actually record what's going on at the location of the chip in the brain. What are the spike trains doing? So when he puts these into the subthalamic nucleus to turn off Parkinson tremor, he can actually record the subthalamic nucleus. So we've got a little sensor deep in the brain that is a spot that they say that they can see. Now, Dirk says, so put your electrodes on the top and tell me what I'm seeing. And if you can do that, that would be interesting. Mm-hmm. So, the response from Bob was, well, that's awfully small. The subthalamic nucleus is awfully small. Well, you're the one who's put it on the list of things you said you could see. So is it too small to see, or can you see it? And, he backed away from the offer of the proof. And anyway, he came up as his turn, and he said, well, I've got 400 articles from the Library of Congress, all supporting this. And Dirk said, well, just a second now. I just published a paper, and I pulled like 600-700 papers, and going through those, I found like 4 or 5 that I could use as references in my publication. So which ones of these 400 that you say are in the Library of Congress are you claiming as evidentiary proof for your technique? And he showed a couple, and Dirk said, well, that can be interpreted a lot of different ways. I mean, you can get that outcome in other ways. So so far, not convincing.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I would be tickled pink if we can do it, and it'll play out. I mean, science is that way. If you can actually show cerebellar problems and measure them, and
that was my question. If they could hear that room. Dr. Murray, welcome. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Good to see you. We're talking about the cerebellum. I had something in the back of my mind, literally, the cerebellum, and we were talking about the new softwares out there that claim that say they can read them, and if they can read them, Jay doesn't believe it. But if they could, what kind of things could we help? Autism? Just throwing it out there.
Well, we help autism now. And like I say, the cerebellum interacts through the basal ganglia with the frontal lobe motor strip and frontal lobe affect and attentional regulation. So it isn't like we don't end up working with it. We don't assume we've got an electrode in it, because we don't. And to see it from outside, it's not oriented with pyramidal cell layers so that you can see it from outside. And those that say they can see it from outside are making a fairly extraordinary claim for EEG. And now, MEG, you can see all sorts of activity within it, but EEG is not MEG. So, and the the proof is in the publications, and you publish outcomes based on work that you do. You're going to have them published in good journals. There's predatory journals out there. For those of you who look at neuroscience, there's a list of predatory journals called Beal's list, Beal's list of predatory journals. If it's a predatory journal, a couple of things you'll notice. Number one, their impact factor is usually very low, quite often below 1. And that means nobody's going to read it. And if you're published in that kind of a journal, meta-analysis can't use that publication because the journal quality is too questionable for the respectable journal to accept something that's been published there. And quite often you'll see the person who's got his publication there also sits on their review board now. They contact you online and invite you to submit something and say,
That's
oh, by
part
the
of the
way,
invitation. You get to sit on the editorial board.
yeah. And by the way, there's you could do a special edition, and you'd be the editor of the special edition, and but it's a predatory deal. It's not, it's not a real science journal, and those are out there, and the people who do the work. If you've actually done the work and you publish it there, you've wasted your time publishing it there. And once you've published it there, you can't publish it somewhere else. You can't dual publish the same content. So pick the journal that you're going to publish in, and make it a respectable journal. And they may go back and forth with you about the writing and so forth, but it's worth it to get into a journal that actually is going to be seen. Impact factor 2, 3, 4, 6. You've got major viewership, and the impact factor is just that. I mean, what's the impact going to be? Thud. And you put it into a journal with less than an impact factor 1, it's a thud. Nobody saw it. Anyway,
what are the top journals then? What are the top 3 subjectively?
For let's say you're looking for a journal that's open to neurofeedback and EEG, QEEG. There's the ECNS, EEG and Clinical Neuroscience Society, has the Clinical EEG and Neurophysiology journal as their kind of associated journal. APB has the APB, not just skip one A and you got the acronym for the journal. Applied Psychophysiology and Biofeedback, that's the journal. They also have kind of a magazine-like journal. It's still peer-reviewed, but it's biofeedback, and that's a perfectly good journal. It actually has a good impact factor. ISNR has theirs, which is an open source journal, which is one of the kinds of things that happens in predatory journals. A lot of them are open source. So when ISNR went their own way, when their publisher basically took over the publication, and they didn't have access to control of anything, so they basically split up and set up their own open source journal. It's actually got some viewership now, so they end up having to kind of prove themselves with their track record that open source can be a mistake, but it can be done well as well.
What if I threw out the cerebellum, like what do you think we will, like, what's the Titanic out there? What are we going to find in the brain that is going to help
take whatever symptoms and alleviate them
You
that
know,
have already
we
been done.
already see so much from the cortex. If you know what you're looking at, you can work with almost anything out there. We work with intractable epilepsy, where people are having hundreds of seizures a day, are out of control. Doctors can't help them with medications, and we train them how to not have seizures and be off all meds. And now seizure-free, med-free for years. Um, we take people with autism where they can't speak and are unable to make eye contact. I mean, just what you would consider full autism. Now, the DSM-5 got rid of the Asperger's category. I thought that was actually useful at one point. But those kinds of diagnoses are based on behavioral presentation. And with training of the brain, you can end up getting things working well enough so that you can no longer be diagnosed as autistic. Now, you can't catch it, so you can't cure it, but you can train somebody to operate their brain to the point where they're not diagnosable as something that's wrong like that. We can work with anxiety. We can work with affective dysregulation. Schizophrenia is an iffy thing. There's not a lot of ultimate success in that area. There is amazing success with enhanced function for people that are usually considered untrainable, Down syndrome and severely developmentally delayed kids. So
here, I think one of the errors that we consistently make is we're looking for the Holy Grail. I mean, I don't think there is a Holy Grail. But I think what uniformly we can do, and Jay has also already mentioned a couple of the areas where we're still a bit stuck in terms of helping folks, but literally we can train. Therefore, we can improve almost all states and traits that are exhibited through signatures in the EEG. I mean, it's really that simple. Again, caveat qualifier, if you know what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
So if you have educated yourself in such a way that you can recognize the signatures and that you know how to target them. And I think we're getting more and more refined. I'm going to be a little bit biased. People who really know what they're doing are getting significantly more refined. People who don't bother to learn how to do this are going, I don't want to say global, but they're just kind of doing the wiggle jiggle. Just trying to shift everything at the same time. And sure, those programs kind of do something, you shake things up a little bit, but the power, I think, is in the exclusive ability to read the raw EEG and the conversions, and then targeting based on the symptoms that you see. But I think, talking about what Jay was referring to, I would love to see within my lifetime if we can really get after certain forms of psychosis and schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Again, we can quiet a little bit, and many of us are really proud of the little bit we can do. But for example, the breakthroughs that we've made in autism, again, it's a neuroatypicality. We don't cure it, as Jay said, but we can really refine some of the behaviors so quality of life goes up for the individual and everyone around them. The psychosis, we can dampen it a bit. Jay, do you have any hope in that area? Is anybody working on this and finding some stuff?
Some of the issues that are often psychosis are sympathetic, parasympathetic balance issues. They're sympathetically over aroused to the point that they're kind of out of control. And that's controlled in the insula. And you can train the insula if you know what you're doing. Yes, somebody asked me, well, what electrode is sitting over the insula? And I said, well, the electrode sitting over the insula doesn't record it at all. because its vector is lateral underneath it. C3 and C4 kind of sit over top of it, but if it's shooting back and forth underneath it, there's no radial current source, and we don't see it in EEG. So, but you get, if you know what's a far field phase reversal, you see between the temporal and the vertex, you see a phase reversal, and that's a reliable phase reversal. You can do a source localization, and it shows you the insula. It also can be responsible for undiagnosable chronic abdominal pain or distress. We've actually got a talk at the Suisun Summit this year by Greg Charbonneau. And we had a case, and he had an Insula signature, and he had abdominal problems, but that wasn't the intention of the training. He also had some other stuff going on, and when we trained and normalized the Insula, this chronic problem of gastrointestinal pain went away. He had a GI specialist out in Seattle who kind of, now after all these years, now the thing we couldn't figure out is gone. Yeah, I want to talk to the doctor that you were working with. So he talked, and Greg talked about the Insula and its implication, that how it's tied into the GI system and everything. And, all that made sense. And, the proof is in the pudding, and the guy got better with the Insula training. Time goes by. Pretty soon the GI guy has another fellow that they can't, they scope up one side, down the other, they poke around here and there, they can't find anything wrong, but there's chronic distress. And so he contacted Greg and said, I've got another guy who we can't find anything inside. Can you do that thing you do on the head and see if this guy's got one of those things? And sure enough, the Insula was off in this guy as well. And so Greg's had a series of these, and the GI specialist is just blown away by essentially the commonality of GI symptom and the Insula. If you look in the literature, you'll find Crohn's disease. Oh, Crohn's, everybody, that's an abdominal problem. Well, there's a connectivity change in the Insula. The old term abdominal epilepsy. It's an archaic term. It's not part of the international classification system. It was very descriptive. What you have is a smooth muscle contraction. Well, what controls the peristalsis? The posterior insula. So if you have a discharge in the Sylvian-Fisher posterior insula temporal area, it can end up causing a spasm intestinally. That's painful, and at that point, you can have vasovagal syncope because of the pain, but that's abdominal epilepsy. And there's literature out there that still talks about that. It's an archaic term, but it sneaks back in because it's so damn descriptive. And anyway, we can treat all of this, and we can treat it with relatively older approaches, but there's also newer approaches that seem to have some interesting validity. Let's say we're trying to focus on something left frontally, and it's a very slow focus, but we want to train it. Well, the training is going to be full of eye blinks. This is going to be hell on wheels to try and train that, because the person's eyes are the dominant signal. An ICA component can focus on the signal and be insensitive to the artifact. It's a spatial temporal filter, and it focuses on the component, not the ongoing other signals. So Antonio Martins-Muro is coming over from England. He's going to be showing some interesting ICA-based feedback techniques. And also showing infra-low frequency pre-post 0.6 hertz signal change after treatment. So very interesting DC or very low frequency content as well as higher frequency content, depending upon what components you end up having to use. Anyways, we're trying to bring some interesting folks from around the world. Yuri's going to pop in for the summit, and that's always interesting. I've got a picture of Yuri and I in Australia at Point Danger with the sign in between us, Point Danger. And so it's a dangerous point when the two of us get together, So
I request
anyway.
that picture, please.
I'll try and dig up that picture for you. Anyway, Yuri and I go back a long ways. He was elected the president of the European chapter of ISNR when that was being formed initially in 2000, and we lectured together in 2000, 2001 in Portugal, and I introduced him to the ICA, asked him, are you using ICA to take out eye movement out of your data? And he said, oh, we tried PCA and it just doesn't work. So I said, well, there's this spatially constrained independent component analysis paper from Schwartz Computational, Scott McKeag, and showed him the paper. And 2 weeks later, I had his software with it implemented in it. And he actually, I thought of it as a way to take out artifact. I didn't really see it for what it really could do, which is to identify the components that make up the EEG, not the artifacts, but the EEG itself. And he got the Soviet Union Prize for Science. So it became the Russian Prize for Science, but he got it for using the ICA on ERP and EEG and the database and all of that. So we've been very good friends. And we've lectured together a whole bunch of times in Australia and here in the U.S. as well.
Jay, you brought up
it'll be good to have him.
You brought up the abdomen and vagal nerve. How does that play a role in what people try to do with neurofeedback? What is it? What does it do? Does it connect things with the brain and the gut? Like, what's going on with that?
Yeah, and in fact, not just brain and gut, but also brain and heart. And let's say you're a psychiatrist and you've bought into the TMS world, and you plunk down your $250,000, and you got your big chair with a big magnet that you can point at their head. And you're going to find a spot that makes their fingers twitch, but right hand finger twitch from the left motor strip, and then they go forward from there to try and find the right spot. Well, if it is the right spot and they pulse it, you'll get a cardiac deceleration. You've just stimulated the vagal nerve network left frontally, and you'll decelerate the heart. And it turns out that if you stimulate with too much power, you'll decelerate the heart more than it should be decelerated. So you can start to titrate the dose of the TMS based on the cardiac deceleration. And so Martijn Arns found the fact that the heart decelerated. I mean, you got to look at the heart and the stimulation at the same time. And I mean, he was looking at it and he saw the deceleration, and he replicated it with a handful of people, and then they actually did a study. And now it's a major aspect of the research in TMS. But yeah, a vagal nerve, you can get at it. It runs down through. You see some things that you clip around the neck, and they stimulate at the vagal nerve, and not one size fits all. Vagal nerve stimulation may end up being fine for some people, but probably really, really, really a bad idea for others. And you should be chatting with somebody who knows a fair bit about neuroscience before you just go strapping on a vagal nerve stimulator. There are things to kind of calm and stabilize, but you can end up having difficulties as well. People that have had trauma sometimes have a dissociation, not necessarily a great outcome. Depersonalization, derealization, the detached, unreal perception. So it's not, you don't just kick it and see what happens. You have every right to just kick it and see what happens. Don't get me wrong. It's your noggin, and if you want to do something with it, it's yours to do with it. But don't expect always to have the right thing happen without having people that know what they're doing consult with what you're considering. And even then, unless you have a good workup to know what's going on in there, you don't know which tire to kick unless you actually look.
You said my piece for me, Jay. I can stay quiet all day. But actually, it is really important to know that there are a lot of stimulators that you can get out there, in the wellness product classification. And the vagal nerve or vagus nerve is really hot and cool now. But as Jay said, there's a difference between calming and stabilizing, and decelerating the heart to extent that you could have issues. And I think that's something that we always have to hound home.
Yeah.
Be here. So you're not training
the TMS magnet literally can drop it down to 40 beats a minute if you do too much stimulation right at the right spot. And that's not a healthy frequency for a heart rate. At 40 beats a minute, you're bradycardic to the point where some people it's not sufficient. And there are people that have historically found people passing out in the chair, and they wonder why. Well, they hypothesize might have been epileptiform discharge or something. Well, you could have decelerated the heart and had syncope, for goodness sakes. Until they found out that was an effect, there wasn't any way to end up avoiding the issue. But you got to look at the heart rate at the same time as you're doing your stim.
So when people faint, is that what's happening? The vagus nerve plays a role in it. It's not something you're training. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on with it that people are having symptoms.
Syncope can be vasovagal, some kind of vagus nerve, vagal, usually pain, intestinal pain, real intense. Sometimes other things, but vasovagal syncope, you pass out from that. Now you can pass out from other things too. I mean, epileptiform discharges you can pass out. You can pass out from electrolyte imbalances and heart rhythm issues. I mean, there's so many things. But when somebody has passed out, the big dual to figure out what's going on is the heart and the brain. And if they've passed out and they have an irregular heartbeat, you've got your problem kind of spotted, and you got to focus in on getting that fixed. If the heart is ticking like nobody's business and everything's fine, you've got to start to look at the possibility of syncope from blood pressure dropping out, which usually the heart would end up being a reflection of that. But people pass out from discharges and drop seizures where they just collapse. That's a frontal discharge. So not every syncopal spell is due to epileptiform discharges. You can have a syncopal spell from electrolyte imbalance. Quite often, dehydration, electrolyte imbalance ends up being a common source of syncope.
A little too much alcohol helps as well.
Yeah. Go
That
to
was sarcastic for anybody who was
go go to go to Phoenix, where it's 112 degrees or some
yeah.
damn thing today, and the humidity is like negative. It sucks
Yeah.
humidity out of you. And so you got to drink more than usual, and you drink alcohol, which tends to dehydrate you slightly anyway. And the next thing you know, people pass out, not because they drank too much, but because they dehydrated. And they may fall over and twitch, and somebody thinks it's a seizure. It's a syncopal spell, and they get them to the hospital. They put a bag of D5W up hanging, and they're back on their feet in a half hour and back to the meeting. So uh,
Again,
we
we're not MDs here, so I have to qualify, but another very simple one is insufficient salt in the system. And you have polarized salt consumption. All the processed foods are loaded, and then individuals who are very careful about the salt very frequently don't have enough, and they can easily get these electrolyte imbalances. Yeah.
yeah, I have diabetes insipidus, which doesn't have anything to do with sugar. This is the real thing, diabetes. No control of your kidney function. So water goes through me and carries with it all the electrolytes.
Mhm.
And I have to drink water and drink water and drink water and drink water. And people that have been at the Suisun Summit realize there's somebody usually assigned to every 10 minutes or so catch my attention. Drink some water. So to try and keep me hydrated, because I'll forget about it. I'll get off onto a trip about something and forget about my hydration. So, but if I drink too much water without balancing things, then I don't have enough potassium. Sodium goes out more, potassium is lost as well, but hypokalemia ends up giving you cardiac problems. So when I notice my heart's going funny, I know that I've missed my salts, and I've got a tablet of salt sitting over here next. I've got meds at arm's reach over here. So anyway, yeah, have to balance that out. And the common ways that people who don't have a pituitary die are cardiac problems from not maintaining proper salt balance, or catching a cold. Just you catch a cold, you don't realize that you caught a cold because you're on steroids suppressing your inflammatory response, and you go to bed at a lower steroid level at night than during the day. When you start in the morning at breakfast of champions, you take your steroids. So but you go to bed without having increased your steroid dose, and you didn't know that your lungs were about to fill up with fluid. So you go to bed and
Hey, Jay, you're starting to get a bit morbid here.
well,
It's just one of those days.
that
Pete, what are you going to do with this
all
program?
of
I don't know.
all of the crazy imbalances that can end up happening.
Yeah.
So there's a reason that they only give you an average of 10 years if you don't have a pituitary, because it's a difficult circumstance maintaining everything in a balance. You know, you're juggling maybe 6, 7 meds. If one of them goes out of balance, you can't stop juggling. You can't go to the lab and get a test to tell you what's off. You got to make the right guess. If you make the wrong guess, you can make yourself even worse.
Well,
So,
Jay, keep on making the right guess and proving them wrong.
yeah, so far I've been lucky enough. The few times I've made the wrong guess, and I had folks that were intact enough to put me back together for it. Yeah. So anyway, I've lucked out for 34 years, going on 35, and from an average of 10 for males, only 7 for females. Your hormone systems are a lot more complex than mine. And and now that I don't have any, except those that I take. So
So potassium. What about magnesium?
yeah, that's not one that's lost as badly, but it is. and the salts that I've got here end up having potassium heavy, a little bit of sodium, magnesium, trace minerals.
I mean, mental health podcast, not so much nutrition, but we do dabble into it. But if you
I'll
take
jump
all
in a
these,
bit there, Pete, in terms of how I really feel a lot of psychologists, therapists, etc., should very much inform themselves on magnesium. Okay. Magnesium deficiency is highly implicated in so many symptoms. Anything from insomnia, anxiety, restless leg syndrome, all kinds of things. And again, I'm not an MD. Okay. But there are some basic things. Vitamin D, magnesium, the B family of people enjoy a little bit of alcohol. And then of course, other things that need to balance those things out, but, and iron as well. Iron is huge. And people, a lot of menopausal female forget about iron. They kind of feel, I'm not menstruating anymore. I don't have to worry about this anymore. But again, iron in terms of everybody thinks about fatigue, but also in terms of anxiety. We're very complex beings, and I think having a good base knowledge and complementary I was going to say nutrition. I'm not huge on supplements. I like to say in most of North America, we're overfed and undernourished. And then we throw out a lot of supplements. And Jay probably knows significantly more than I do, just based on what he was talking about before. But, in terms of how the body metabolizes pills, versus nutrients in complex forms, like your iron and your lentils versus a pill. Lentils will not give you constipation. Taking an iron pill will give you constipation. We can kind of go down the list of things, but yeah, having either some basic knowledge yourself to ask your clients to check up on, or having a good alliance with somebody who's not selling supplements can be really, really positive.
very expensive urine.
Yeah.
Can be.
Actually, let's get into a little bit of that humor. If you're taking all kinds of supplements and you're well hydrated and your pee is, shall we say, tinted, yeah, exactly. Very expensive urine, right? And in terms of the water filtration, the little fishies and people are really getting a lot of vitamins that they probably don't need.
If you're taking things to an extreme, you can end up with fat soluble that end up building up and being a problem.
Yeah.
Vitamin A, and
Yeah,
that can be a big problem.
Yeah.
Well, you just see all these supplement stores and these people that are lining up all their pills, and I'm just looking at it. Just can't like a multivitamin just take care of that? I mean, how can you go past 100%?
I don't know. I think kind of old-fashioned and judgmental on this type of stuff. If you kind of regulate what you put into your body, and you get a little bit of political in terms of how quickly the food goes from field to table, you don't have a lot of these issues. Now, I'm not saying don't have a bag of chips and some chocolate cake here and there. I mean, that's not the issue we're talking about, but it's this massive over-processing. And nutrition takes far too long from source to consumption, that a lot of the value is lost. I mean, I'm talking also here about under-ripened food. You don't get the nutritional value. I can go on and on and on about this, and this is where Europe is refusing to adopt many of the errors that North America has made. And I think it grossly affects mental health. I mean, we can see literally on the bodies what it's doing. I think we're in a culture of underweight people and overweight people. I think there are very few at weight or balanced individuals, and that should say a lot. We've lost a lot of not just our knowledge, but our common sense in terms of what we choose to put in our bodies.
We do have a good time of year in North America right now of farmers markets.
Yes.
And a farmer's market, go in and try to find lots of different colors. They say having a wide variety of colors ends up kind of guaranteeing that you're going to have a wide variety of substances that you're consuming. So
Yeah, I think the basic thing is, if the produce that you buy is still good in 5 days, then it didn't hold the nutrition. It should be at its tipping point. That's the perfect time to actually consume things. If I could digress a little bit, when I was living in Italy as a younger woman, you go into the shop and the person, you would never pick out your own things. They would pick the things out for you, and they'd always pick the ripest things first, unless you said, this is for tomorrow's dinner, not today's. Don't even talk about the product waste, or the food waste just wasn't there using it that way, but people have better nutrition. So yeah, lots of things, and we talk about mental health, we talk about pharmaceuticals, we talk about the training that we do, but you need to be doing, or you should be, let me qualify, you should be doing, or you can do a lot of other things to improve the outcomes of self in any therapies, whether they're EEG or otherwise.
And we're
supplements.
Well, we're at time and just waiting like 5 years when Ozempic is more readily available. Everybody is on it, and they're losing weight. They are losing weight. Gambling.
Difficulty is muscle mass loss as well. And that's going to end up, I think, being one of the negative things associated with it. If you yo-yo and all you're doing is fat yo-yo and you're not losing muscle in your yo-yo, it's not that, I mean, you're up and down, but if you go down and lose muscle mass, that you're losing the ability to burn, and that's a fatal loss of function. So
let's put age in here as well. Individuals, I would say over 35, 40, boy, oh boy, are you going to be affecting your elder years if you play that game. Hugely so. Yeah.
Dr. Marie Swingle, Jay Gunkelman. Another whipped up episode of the Neurofeedback podcast. Have a great weekend, all.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Neuronoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.